The grocery store was chaos. Shoppers screamed as a man holding a little girl tried to push through the crowd. Ranger, the scruffy dog of a homeless man, barked furiously, his teeth bared. Ethan lunged forward, tackling the stranger to the ground while the child slipped from his arms. For a moment, it felt like the entire store held its breath. Was the little girl even alive? But this story doesn't begin with flashing lights or desperate shouts. It starts much earlier, with a homeless man and his loyal dog simply trying to survive one ordinary night. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you. The grocery store was buzzing, with ordinary life shoppers pushing carts, children tugging on their parents' sleeves, cash registers beeping steadily. In the middle of it all, a homeless man named Ethan entered the store. He wasn't there to buy much, with only a few coins in his pocket. Food wasn't easy to come by. But walking beside him was his most trusted companion, a scruffy but alert dog named Ranger. They weren't welcomed warmly, but Ethan ignored the glares. He just wanted to check for discounted bread. What happened next would change everything in his life forever. Ranger usually behaved well inside stores. Ethan had trained him to sit quietly by his side, never bothering anyone. But that day, something strange happened. Just as they reached the aisle filled with cereal boxes, Ranger froze. His ears pricked up, and his entire body stiffened. Ethan frowned, tugging gently on the leash, but Ranger wouldn't budge. Then came a low growl that rumbled deep in his chest, the kind of growl Ethan had only heard when danger was near. The shoppers around them barely noticed at first. Ethan knew immediately his dog sensed something was very wrong. Ethan's gaze followed Ranger's eyes. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Families were shopping, teenagers were laughing, and a few older folks checked canned goods. Then Ethan saw him a man, about 40, wearing a plaid shirt and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He carried a little girl, maybe 2 years old, in his arms. Her tiny hands hung limp, her head resting heavily on his shoulder. She wasn't squirming or giggling like a normal child. Instead, she looked eerily still. Ethan's heart sank. Ranger barked, loud and sharp, making everyone in the aisle turn. The bark echoed down the aisle, startling shoppers. A woman dropped a carton of eggs, the shells shattering across the floor. Another pulled her child closer, alarm flashing in her eyes. The man with the little girl flinched and turned quickly, his grip tightening around the toddler. He muttered something under his breath and started walking faster toward the exit. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest. Ranger's instincts had saved him before, guiding him away from fights and dangerous people on the street. If Ranger thought something was wrong with this man, Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it. Ethan stepped forward, his voice rough but steady. "Hey, wait a second," he called out. The man didn't respond. Instead, he moved faster, his boots thudding against the shiny floor. The little girl's head lolled to the side, showing her pale face. Ethan's stomach twisted. She wasn't moving at all. Ranger barked again, pulling on the leash so hard that Ethan nearly stumbled. People in the store gasped, watching the strange scene unfold. The cashier whispered into her phone, likely calling for security. Ethan's pulse raced. He had no authority here, but he couldn't just stand by. Something was terribly wrong. The man finally snapped, his voice sharp. "Get that mutt away from me." His words were angry, but Ethan noticed the tremor in his tone. He was sweating despite the cool air conditioning, his movements jerky and unnatural. Ethan swallowed hard. "Is the kid okay?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The man shot back, quickly, too quickly. "She's my niece. She's sick. I'm taking her home." Ranger growled even louder, baring his teeth now. The little girl didn't stir, didn't whimper, didn't do anything a child would normally do. Ethan felt the weight of dread pressing down. The shoppers parted nervously, leaving space as Ethan blocked the man's path. He raised a hand, his dirty sleeve falling back to reveal his weathered arm. "Just slow down a minute," Ethan said. His words weren't commanding, but there was a raw sincerity in his tone. The man's eyes darted around, scanning for an escape route. Ranger's barking grew frantic, echoing through the aisles like an alarm no one could silence. The little girl's limp body shifted slightly, her tiny teddy bear dangling from her arm. Ethan knew this wasn't right. His instinct screamed that this wasn't the girl's guardian. Suddenly, the man shoved past Ethan, knocking him against a display of cereal boxes. Cardboard packages tumbled to the floor in a cascade. The shoppers gasped and stepped back. "Stop him!" Ethan shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. Ranger lunged forward, nearly slipping on the polished floor as Ethan released his grip on the leash. The scruffy dog bounded after the man, his barks sharp and relentless. Ethan scrambled up from the mess of cereal boxes, his heart pounding. He wasn't fast, but Ranger was. In seconds, the loyal dog was closing the distance, teeth bared, ready to act. The man pushed over a cart in desperation, sending oranges rolling across the tile. Ranger leapt over the obstacle effortlessly, his claws scraping as he landed. The little girl's head bounced weakly against the man's shoulder, her body still lifeless. "Please stop!" Ethan begged, running as fast as his tired legs would carry him. Shoppers screamed, some ducking behind displays, others pulling out phones to record the chaos. The man darted toward the automatic doors, his grip tightening on the girl. Ranger lunged, his body like a missile. His jaws snapped dangerously close to the man's leg. The man stumbled, cursing loudly, and nearly lost his balance. Ranger's sudden attack slowed him down enough for Ethan to catch up. With one final desperate effort, Ethan hurled himself forward, tackling the man from behind. They both crashed onto the tile floor, the child rolling gently from his arms. Ranger immediately shifted his attention, circling the girl protectively, barking at anyone who tried to come too close. Ethan pinned the struggling man down with surprising strength, fueled by adrenaline. "Who are you?" Ethan shouted, his voice filled with fury. The man didn't answer, his eyes burned with cold defiance. Security guards finally rushed into the aisle, radios crackling. One grabbed Ethan's shoulder roughly. "Get off him!" he barked, assuming the homeless man was the aggressor. Ethan shook his head desperately. "It's not me, it's him. Look at the kid." His voice cracked with urgency. Ranger barked louder, standing guard over the small girl, who still wasn't moving. One of the guards crouched beside her, gently lifting her into his arms. The child stirred faintly, letting out a weak whimper. The guard's eyes widened. Something was very wrong, and suddenly Ethan's story seemed much more believable. The man beneath Ethan struggled violently, shouting curses. "That's my niece! Give her back!" he screamed, but his voice shook with panic. The guard holding the child frowned. "She doesn't even look like you," he muttered under his breath. Shoppers crowded at the ends of the aisle, some whispering, others filming with their phones. Ethan's chest heaved with exhaustion, but he refused to let go. Ranger growled low, his gaze locked on the man. The guards exchanged a quick look, and snapped handcuffs onto the stranger's wrists. For the first time, Ethan felt a flicker of relief. Justice might be catching up. As the man was hauled to his feet, the child clung weakly to the guard, letting out a soft cry. Ethan reached for Ranger, who immediately pressed against his leg, tail still stiff with tension. One of the guards looked at Ethan carefully. "You stopped him?" he asked. Ethan nodded, his breath ragged. "My dog knew something was wrong," he said simply. There was no pride in his tone, just truth. The guard gave a small nod of acknowledgement. For the first time in years, someone wasn't looking at Ethan like he was worthless. Instead, they saw him as a protector. The police were called, arriving within minutes. Red and blue lights flashed through the store's front windows, painting the walls in urgent color. Officers stormed inside, immediately taking custody of the man. He spat curses, kicking against their grip, but he was no match for their control. The little girl was passed gently into the arms of a paramedic, who checked her quickly. Ethan stood back, leaning on Ranger for balance, his knees trembling from the adrenaline. Shoppers whispered around him, pointing at the scruffy man with the barking dog. For once, their whispers carried admiration instead of scorn. One officer approached Ethan directly, his expression stern but not unkind. "We need a statement," he said. Ethan nodded silently, stroking Ranger's fur for comfort. "My dog saw it first," he began, his voice hoarse. "The way that man held her, it wasn't right. She wasn't moving, and he just wanted to get out." The officer scribbled notes, glancing up occasionally. "You did the right thing," he said finally. Those words struck Ethan deeper than he expected. Years of being ignored, judged, and dismissed melted away, if only for a moment. Tonight, his voice had been heard. Outside, the cold air hit Ethan like a wave. He stepped out with Ranger, watching the police car door slam shut as the suspect was taken away. The child was loaded into an ambulance, her small figure barely visible beneath blankets. Ethan whispered a silent prayer for her safety. Ranger whined softly, as though he understood the weight of the moment. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt his presence in the world mattered. He hadn't saved the girl alone. Ranger had sensed the danger first. Together, they had stopped something unthinkable from happening. Reporters began to gather, alerted by flashing lights and frantic phone calls. Microphones were shoved in Ethan's face. "Who are you? How did you know?" they demanded. Ethan stammered, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "I didn't," he admitted. "My dog did. He just knew something wasn't right." Ranger sat proudly at his side, tail wagging slowly, eyes alert. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the unlikely hero duo, a homeless man and his ragged dog. Ethan wanted to shrink away from the spotlight, but part of him knew the story was no longer his to hide. The world was already watching. The crowd around the store grew thicker. Strangers who once passed Ethan without a glance now approached with gratitude. "You saved that little girl," one woman whispered, tears in her eyes. A man clapped him on the back, offering thanks. Ethan nodded awkwardly, unused to kindness. Ranger barked once, breaking the tension, and a child in the crowd giggled, reaching out to pet him. Ethan let it happen, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For a fleeting moment, he wasn't just another nameless man on the streets. He was someone who mattered, even if only for a night. As the ambulance pulled away, the paramedic gave Ethan a final nod of respect. "She'll be okay," he assured. Ethan exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping. The officers wrapped up their questions, telling him he might be called later for more information. Then, One officer surprised him by pressing a small bundle of food into his hands. "For you and your dog," he said quietly. Ethan's throat tightened with emotion. For years, he had taken scraps no one wanted. Tonight, someone gave freely, not because he begged, but because he earned it. Ranger barked softly, as if approving. By the time the flashing lights faded and the crowd dispersed, Ethan stood alone again with Ranger. The store was quiet now, the chaos replaced by silence. He looked down at his dog, rubbing behind his ears. "We did good, boy," he murmured. Ranger leaned into him, warm and loyal. The world might forget tomorrow, but Ethan wouldn't. For the first time in years, he felt pride, not shame. His dog had saved more than a child. Tonight he had saved Ethan too. Together, on a cold night in a grocery store, they had proven that heroes can come from anywhere. The morning after the incident, Ethan and Ranger woke beneath the overpass where they usually slept. The city felt different somehow. He still had the small bag of food an officer had pressed into his hands. Ranger wagged his tail happily as Ethan shared the bread with him. "You earned this more than me," Ethan whispered, breaking the crust into pieces. Yet, as he chewed, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. The man's words in the store still echoed in his mind. "They'll kill me if I don't deliver." Deliver to who and why? By noon, Ethan wandered back near the store, curious to see if people remembered what happened. To his surprise, a crowd was waiting outside. A local news van parked on the curb, cameras pointed toward him as he approached. "There he is!" someone shouted. Microphones and flashing cameras swarmed instantly. "Ethan, what made your dog bark? How did you know the child wasn't safe?" The questions overwhelmed him. Ranger pressed close to his leg, barking at the chaos. Ethan lifted a hand, his voice trembling. "It wasn't me, it was him. Ranger saved that girl." He spoke truthfully, nothing more. The reporters ate it up. "The homeless man and his heroic dog," one headline blared that evening. Photos of Ethan, ragged clothes and all, appeared online alongside Ranger, his fur scruffy but his eyes bright. Ethan felt strange, seeing himself on screens in a diner window later that night. Strangers recognized him, some nodding respectfully, others dropping coins into his cup. He wasn't used to attention, let alone praise. "You're famous now, buddy," Ethan muttered to Ranger, scratching behind his ears. Ranger barked once, as if unimpressed. For him, saving lives was just another day of loyalty. Days passed, and detectives tracked Ethan down for more questioning. They invited him into the police station, a place that usually terrified him. Ethan sat stiffly on a chair, Ranger curled at his feet, as officers explained what they had discovered. "That man wasn't acting alone," one detective said gravely. "He's part of a network moving children across state lines." Ethan's chest tightened. "So, there are more kids?" The detective nodded grimly. "We believe so. And your testimony, plus the way your dog reacted, may have just cracked this case open." Ethan suddenly felt the weight of it all. The officers asked Ethan to describe everything again, the way the man held a child, his panicked movements, his excuses. Ethan repeated it patiently, knowing every detail mattered. Ranger lifted his head occasionally, as if adding his agreement. When the interview ended, one officer leaned closer. "You might not realize it, but you saved more than one life that night." Ethan blinked. "What do you mean?" The officer sighed. "Your courage gave us the lead we needed. We've already rescued several other children connected to this ring. Ethan's throat tightened. For the first time, he felt like a true hero. News of the larger rescue operation spread quickly. Headlines spoke not just of police action, but of the unlikely hero who sparked it all. Ethan's story was everywhere now, on television, in newspapers, across social media. Donations poured in from strangers moved by his bravery. Some wanted to help him find a home. Others sent food and supplies for Ranger. Ethan, overwhelmed, didn't know how to accept so much kindness. He had lived years invisible, and now the world couldn't stop looking. "Guess we're not shadows anymore," he murmured to Ranger. The dog wagged his tail, eyes gleaming with loyalty. Despite the sudden attention, Ethan remained humble. He still slept under bridges, still scavenged for meals, still carried himself like the man who had once been ignored. Yet something shifted in the way people treated him. Shopkeepers offered free sandwiches. Strangers knelt to pet Ranger. Children waved when he walked by. Ethan realized it wasn't fame that mattered, it was dignity. For the first time in years, he felt respected, even valued. Ranger stayed close, always alert, always guarding. The two of them were inseparable, bound not only by hardship, but by the night they saved an innocent life. One evening, as Ethan sat warming his hands near a barrel fire, a black car pulled up. A woman stepped out, dressed elegantly, but with red-rimmed eyes. "Are you Ethan?" she asked. He nodded cautiously, Ranger watching her carefully. She smiled through tears. "I'm Lily's mother. You saved my daughter." Ethan froze, realizing the toddler's name for the first time. The woman reached out, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you've done for me. They told me she might never come back. And then you." Her words broke into sobs. Ethan felt his own eyes sting with emotion. She insisted on taking him and Ranger to dinner. At first, Ethan refused. "I'm not dressed for fancy places," he muttered, but she smiled gently. "You saved my child. That's all the dress code we need." That night, Ethan sat in a warm restaurant for the first time in decades. The waiters looked shocked, but obeyed when the woman ordered meals. Ranger lay by his side, happily chewing a steak bone they had specially brought out for him. Ethan ate slowly, savoring every bite. For once, he didn't feel out of place. He felt like a guest of honor. Over dinner, Lily's mother explained more. The man had been caught with evidence linking him to a trafficking ring. Because of Ethan and Ranger, the police moved quickly enough to stop the transfer of many other children. "You didn't just save my daughter," she said softly. "You saved families you'll never even meet." Ethan sat silently, overwhelmed. He had spent years feeling worthless, yet here was proof his actions rippled far beyond himself. Ranger rested his head on Ethan's knee, sensing the shift in his master's heart. For the first time, Ethan believed he had purpose again. Word spread further, and soon charities reached out. They offered Ethan housing opportunities, medical care, even therapy for the years he had endured. At first, Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure he deserved so much after so many mistakes in his past. But one charity worker smiled warmly. "Heroes don't need to be perfect. They just need to act when it counts." Ethan finally agreed to move into a small apartment, not just for himself, but for Ranger too. Watching his dog curl up on a warm bed instead of cold pavement was worth more than anything else. Adjusting to stability wasn't easy. Ethan woke up many nights, expecting the rumble of trains overhead or the bite of cold air. Instead, he heard the steady breathing of Ranger curled beside him. The silence was strange, almost unsettling. But each morning, as sunlight poured through clean windows, he felt grateful. He began volunteering at the very store where everything had happened, helping bag groceries and sweeping aisles. At first, customers were startled to see him. Then they smiled, recognizing him as the man who had once saved a child right there among the cereal boxes. One afternoon, while restocking shelves, Ethan overheard two children whispering. "That's him," one said, pointing shyly. "That's the man with the dog." The other nodded solemnly. "He's a hero." Ethan felt heat rise to his face, embarrassed by the attention. But deep down, a part of him swelled with pride. Ranger wagged his tail as if agreeing. For Ethan, this was the greatest reward. Not money, not fame, but knowing that children looked at him and saw someone worth admiring. After years of being invisible, he had become an example, a reminder that anyone could make a difference. Months later, Ethan was invited to a police ceremony. Officers lined the hall, their uniforms sharp and polished. He felt out of place in his borrowed suit, but Ranger trotted proudly at his side with a shiny new collar gifted by the department. The chief spoke about courage, about listening to instincts, and about heroes who come from unexpected places. Then he called Ethan and Ranger to the stage. Applause thundered through the hall as a medal was placed around Ethan's neck and a smaller one attached to Ranger's collar. Ethan blinked back tears. "This is for you, boy," he whispered. After the ceremony, reporters once again crowded, but this time Ethan stood taller. He spoke with steady confidence, giving credit to Ranger at every step. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "My dog knew first. He saved her, and he saved me." The crowd erupted in cheers, and for once Ethan didn't feel like shrinking away. He had learned to accept recognition not as vanity, but as truth. Ranger, wagging his tail happily, barked at the crowd, sending laughter through the hall. It was their moment together, a moment etched forever into the city's memory. Despite the accolades, Ethan never let fame consume him. He continued simple routines, feeding Ranger first every morning, sharing whatever food he had. He spent afternoons volunteering at shelters, talking to others who were still struggling on the streets. "Don't give up," he told them. "Sometimes the world notices when you least expect it." People listened because his story proved it true. Ranger always stayed close, a constant reminder of how far they had come. Together, they weren't just surviving anymore. They were living with dignity, hope, and the respect they had once thought impossible to find. Over time, Ethan grew close to Lily's family. They invited him to birthdays, holidays, even simple dinners. Lily herself adored Ranger, hugging his neck tightly whenever she saw him. Watching her grow stronger and healthier filled Ethan's heart with joy. She had been saved from something dark, and now she blossomed in light. Ethan often thought of the man in the store, the words he muttered about others still trapped. The memory haunted him, but it also fueled him. He vowed never to turn away again if he sensed something wrong. He owed that to Lily and to himself. One winter night, as Ethan walked Ranger past the glowing city lights, he paused to take it all in. Months ago, he had been invisible, surviving day by day with no hope. Now, people waved when they saw him. Children giggled as they asked to pet Ranger. Shopkeepers offered hot drinks. Ethan had become part of the city again, woven back into the fabric of community. Ranger barked joyfully, chasing a drifting snowflake. Ethan smiled softly. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. "We made it through." In that moment, he realized they were no longer lost, they were found. The transformation wasn't just external. It was inside Ethan too. He carried himself differently, shoulders no longer hunched from shame. He had scars from his years on the streets, yes, but now they felt like badges of survival. Ranger remained his anchor, reminding him daily of loyalty, trust, and courage. Together, they embodied resilience. When strangers asked his secret, Ethan always answered simply, "Listen to your dog. Sometimes they know more than we do." People laughed, but he meant every word. Ranger had taught him to trust instincts, to stand firm, and to believe that change was possible. Years later, Ethan would look back on that single night in the grocery store as the turning point of his life. He had entered the store with nothing, no money, no respect, no future. He had left with purpose, dignity, and a story that would inspire thousands. Ranger, the scruffy street dog, had become a symbol of loyalty and courage. And Ethan, once invisible, had become a man others looked up to. Their bond remained unbreakable, forged in hardship and sealed in heroism. Together, they proved that even the forgotten can rise to become heroes when the world least expects it.